Welcome back to Recipe for Revenue with Leah Messina. And I am here today with Ten Vong, a longtime friend of mine. We've worked together on various projects through the years, and I'm super excited to have Ten here today to chat with me and see what he's up to. Ten is chef and co-owner of Ejji Ramen based in Baltimore, Maryland, and he has done a ton of different projects through the years. He's going to tell us about them, what he's working on now. Even though I have lived away from Baltimore for at least 14 years now, I still think about the food that Chen cooks. So I still crave it. I still tell everybody if they're ever in Baltimore, they have to go to his restaurant. So Chen, you have created a lasting memory on my palate, and I am so happy to see you here today and to catch up with you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So my background is I've been cooking for about oh wow, it's been quite a long time, 30 something years now. So
Yeah.
I've cooked throughout Maryland. I started in Baltimore, cooked throughout a bunch of restaurants down here, and then I ended up opening my first restaurant actually when I was 20 years old in
Oh, wow.
Baltimore.
You were really that young. Wow.
Yeah, but I actually, be honest, I learned a lot more about what not to do than what to do. When you're that young
Sure.
and you have your keys to your own bar, it's kind of like a little, you know, it
Trial
was
by
fun.
fire.
It was fun.
Oh, yeah.
Let me just say that.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then after that, I ended up moving to New York, and I cooked around in New York for about 20 years. I worked for a bunch of big time chefs in New York, and then did a lot of consulting, opened a couple of my own places, um, you know, did a bunch of other stuff, and then I came back down here to and to open Ejji Ramen. So that was about 10 years ago.
Right. Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
where I'm now.
And that's where you are now. Yeah, so Ejji Ramen. So I was introduced to your family through your nephew Oscar. So Oscar and I met, geez, almost 2 decades ago, which is insane to even think about it. So
Wow.
about 18 years, and it's when they had chocolate tea, and it was the building next door to where I lived in my office. And I would go in for lunch, and I love this place. They had these amazing infused hot chocolate drinks and sandwiches and some ramen dishes. Not quite ramen like you do at Edgy, but there was some hint of what was to come
Oh
Edgy down the
yeah.
road.
They had well, it was more closer to what our home dishes like. I think they had like the laksa, but more of a
Yes.
traditional laksa, which is a dish that's native to our home country from Malaysia and also Singapore.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I
yeah,
love
so
that dish. So good.
yeah,
So
and
then how did they recruit you to come back to Maryland to open Edgy?
um, I kind of felt like it was time. The more than anything, I think my whole time in New York, because I wasn't a native New Yorker, and by the time, like at that time, like all of my friends that I was close to in New York had all moved different places
Mm,
around the world. So I had friends in
yeah.
London, Korea, and then a bunch moved to Miami, and it was just like, well, I had like one close friend there, and then I was kind of like never really dealt like wherever I lived, it just didn't feel like home. It was more like just like a rest spot, like a rest stop
Hmm.
for me.
Yeah.
So I just decided it was just time for me to kind of come home.
Yeah. So then you came back to Maryland and you started scouting out places for Edgy, and then you decided to open up inside of like a marketplace
Well, no,
format.
well, actually, we didn't have to scout. So the space actually belonged to my brother. He had
Mm,
the space for 20 years, and he was going to retire and give up the lease and stuff like that. So that's how my brothers had talked to him about taking it over, and then they talked to me about coming back down to help out with it, and I was just like,
yeah.
okay, sure, why not? You know,
Yeah.
this could be fun. And
Hmm.
yeah, so and then I had some people that we were working with in New York, and I was that I had done some catering and some private stuff for, and then they were like, "Oh, you're leaving? Are you looking for investors?" So they were like, they
Mhm.
wanted to come in, and so it turned out to be, a nice little mix of people.
Yeah. One of my favorite memories of the working with you guys on launching Edgy was when we did the press nights and
Oh,
reaching out. At that point in time, Maryland and DC had so many more publications than there are now, with
oh,
newspapers and
oh
magazines,
yeah,
and getting out all those. There's actually food writers, like a community of food writers back then, and getting out all those
I
people to
know.
come to the restaurant, and you did these amazing dishes for them to sample for the whole night, and that was such
I
a great
know.
experience.
I actually miss doing that. I mean, restaurant openings, they still do that, but it's now more for like content creators, like,
Right.
but it's still not the same in terms of like, because there's so many now. It's just like, for every city, you have individual content creators and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it's it's a it's definitely a different world. Definitely not that much press anymore, and then there's not really too many objective writers, like,
Hmm.
because most of the content
Yeah.
creators are paid, and most people don't
Right.
realize that it's like, I always tell people, like, you're basically watching a commercial because these guys are being paid
Hmm.
to represent that restaurant. So, they're not really objective in that way.
Hmm.
So it's
So,
that's yeah.
so as a chef, how do you feel about that? Do you prefer to have somebody come in and objectively judge your restaurant and your food, or do you like that you can bring in somebody and say, come up with some amazing content and put it out there in a way that that I would like?
I wouldn't say one is better than the other. I'd say it's like different,
Yeah.
because they do. I mean, it's not that they don't put out. There are some content creators that put amazing stuff together, and I understand they want to be paid for that work. So it's not. I'm not detracting from what they do. It's just like, what I miss is the having the objective opinion. You know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
somebody who's actually objective about places that they're talking about, instead of just
Yeah.
being kind of a paid uh like
Spokesperson, sort of.
spokesperson. Yeah, basically, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and that's kind of the hardest thing to find these days. So, is
Hmm.
like a objective voice that can
Yeah.
kind of steer you to the right things.
Right. No, that's an interesting point. Yeah. So, Edgy, I feel, from my perspective, kind of, collaborating with you guys, but not involved in the food side of the business. You've always tried to bring like interesting spins to what you do, either using really unique ingredients or high quality ingredients, like bringing Kobe beef, or I know now you work with some different farms in Maryland to use their beef and so on. So, do you think that just as a chef, that's the way that you've tried to stand apart, or are you trying to achieve something different with that?
I think one is, you always want to kind of, I mean, the part of being like a chef, especially working with like, ended up working with a lot of fine dining restaurants, a lot of high end restaurants.
Hmm.
So I think part of that was just missing the fine dining scene, and just kind of like,
Yeah.
working with, all those great ingredients. And not that the ingredients that we were working with were bad. We always try to work with
Hmm.
great ingredients. And I think as a chef, you always try to get the best ingredients that you can for, I guess, what you price point wise.
Yeah.
But sometimes I did like to bring in like extravagant ingredients, and what really surprised me was that people really appreciate it, even it was a little more expensive, and
Hmm.
people actually wanted to splurge for it.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the I wouldn't say criticisms, but certainly the comments that we would see a lot is, this is not traditional ramen, and that really was never the intention of Edgy, for it to be traditional ramen. So how have you, from your point of view, felt about that?
Well, so partially was, it was, I mean, I knew a lot about ramen, but I didn't, when I started the process, I wouldn't consider myself like a ramen master at that point. So it was a
Hmm.
learning point for me. And I knew like in terms of like taste wise, like I knew what I wanted, but
Yeah.
um, I kind of felt like for me as a chef, like I don't want to put something out if I can't do it as well or better than anybody else. And that's
Hmm.
just my opinion on things, like in terms of like if I don't feel like I can do it as well as somebody else. And at that point, when we just opened, one of my considerations was that even though there wasn't great ramen, there wasn't any ramen in
There wasn't any
Baltimore.
ramen. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
so anything would be better than
Right.
nothing. So like whatever we put out would be better than nothing. But comparatively, there were great ramen places around the country. There are obviously great ramen places around the world, and thought that if we went traditional, that one is we wanted to stand out, but we also didn't want to do a disservice to all the ramen masters out there who were
Hmm.
very, because a lot of it, because it's such a simple, some of it's like some of them are so simple that it's
Hmm.
like the perfection of their techniques. So
Right.
I didn't feel like we were there at that point when we opened. I think now, comparatively, now that we've been in for a while, I wouldn't be opposed to doing something as simple, because we
Hmm.
went through the processes of like learning all the little nuances of the dishes and the noodles, the soup, the
Yeah.
toppings, like exactly like all those nuances, like that all those great ramen masters went to like make, even though they're making the same dishes, like what
Hmm.
makes one stand out from the other. Like I think we could do that now, but
Yeah.
10 years ago I wasn't. I'll be honest with you. I wasn't confident that we could.
Hmm.
Look. I'm confident that we could always do good food, but I wasn't
Sure.
confident that we could, do it, and pay homage at the same time to all the stuff that was already out there. You know what I mean? I don't know if that
Right.
makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we went the non-traditional route, only because we also had our heritage, and also because we
Yeah.
knew that there wasn't a basis for comparison. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Right. Yeah, yeah, and like you said, the Alaska ramen, which is definitely by far has been my favorite dish on your guys' menu. And I know during the pandemic time, I think it was hard to get the shrimp or something, and so it was off the menu for quite a while. And how many people commented, "When you bring it back, we need it back." And so, to
Yeah,
your point though, of not putting out things that are subpar, if you couldn't get
we
the
can.
right
Yeah.
ingredients, then it's not going to be out there. So,
Well, yeah, that was blame that on the shipping, because we just couldn't
yeah.
we couldn't get the ingredients. And then speaking of pricing, like
Hmm.
the for us to even get the ingredients that would make it right at the time, like at that time the prices were just so
It's
astronomical that it
insane.
was just, I wouldn't be, I mean, I would have to charge like $30-$40 for that same bowl that we were charging
Wow.
15 for, just to make the money, make even break even or make it back. So it was just like I can't really do that,
Yeah.
you
Can't
know.
see that. Yeah. Yeah. The pandemic changed a lot of things in the restaurant industry. It hurt
Oh,
the restaurant industry tremendously. What are some of the hurdles that you guys feel that happened then and that you still face today from it?
well, one is the work from home culture has definitely hurt the dining scene a lot in the restaurant,
Yeah.
in terms of, well, it depends. I think it hurt it a lot in the cities, especially like a city like Baltimore, where most of the people were commuters. So it was,
Hmm.
I mean, I would guess that we're kind of still at this point missing probably 500,000 people every day that commute in and out of the city for work.
Wow.
So that was the challenge, and where we would pick that up, sort of like, so, kind of had to get kind of creative, and sort of
Hmm.
like China. We had to, I mean, things we did was like, we had to shorten, well, one of the, and the laksa ended up being one of the things, is because, um, you know, the other thing was staffing. So
Hmm.
we didn't have as many people to fill in all the gaps that we used to. We had to So one of the things we had to do, which you've seen across the country with every restaurant, is shorten the hours. So you see,
Yeah.
like even in New York, like
Yeah.
restaurants like closing at 10 o'clock. Like
I know,
I
which is unheard
remember,
of in Manhattan.
I mean, like I remember when I moved to New York, I was like, and I worked at a place called Oreo, and was like one of the top restaurants in the country. And it was
Yeah.
actually, yeah, we had, the best restaurant in the Zagat rating that year. So in New
Hmm.
York, and I remember we opened till 11, but we did a
Hmm.
full dining room seating at 11 o'clock, like sit down at
Oh, wow.
11 o'clock,
Yeah.
and we wouldn't even get out. Like us in the hot kitchen wouldn't get out till 1, and I think our
Yeah.
pastry kitchen, they wouldn't finish the last dish until 2 a.m. People were
Long
eating.
days.
Yeah, people were eating like they were sit down at 11 and finish at like 2:30 in the morning for dinner.
Wow.
So, but nowadays, and I was just saying this to a friend of mine, and partially it's also because I think a lot of people realize that if they ate earlier, like people used to like get off work, they'd go to gym or get home or stay in traffic
Sure.
for 2 hours. They get home at like 6 or 7, make dinner. By the time they finish dinner and cleaning up, it's like 9, 10, 11 o'clock. They'd go to
Right.
bed, or they just do an hour wind down and go to bed. Now a lot of people are
Hmm.
eating. A lot of people are eating earlier. So,
Hmm.
and that's another reason. Like people find out that they eat at 5 o'clock, 5:36.
Yeah.
They're finished by 6 or 7, like cleaning the dishes or whatever they need to do.
You're done. Done for the day.
But now they have 4, 5 hours,
Yeah.
to wind down afterwards before they even have to go to bed. So that's just like,
Hmm.
wow, we just picked up 3 or 4 hours like we didn't have before. It's
Yeah.
like almost a whole nother day's worth of like
Really?
time to
Yeah. If you could just
yourself.
consider, yeah, the end of your workday
Yeah.
segments of, free time. So,
So it's like, people's things are changed. So we also had to change with
uh,
that. And then also, like I said, didn't
hmm.
have the staffing. So we had to, one is shorten our hours. And the other thing was like, because we didn't have enough people to prep everything,
Yeah.
we had to decide, okay, what was the half of our menu that everybody really
Yeah.
wanted to come for, and we had to
Right.
serve the 80% of the people, or 70 to 80% of the people who came for what they came for, and
Yeah.
then the other dishes that you know some of them were like actually more of my favorite dishes, like, but if they
Hmm.
didn't sell a certain amount, we just had to like cut it.
Right. Yeah. So you feel, from the creativity side, is that really hindered what you've been able to do then? Because you're just going based upon what's the best seller.
Well, what we did was we cut the menu down a lot, and then from the creative side, what we did was we just did more specials, like a couple of specials here and
Okay.
there. So it
Yeah.
still allowed us to be creative. It just,
Yeah.
like I said, but then it wouldn't have to be on the menu. So like, if we didn't have time to get to it, instead of having, like, we could have anywhere from 2, 3, 4, 5 specials a day. So,
Hmm.
depending on how much prep time we had, we might have 2 specials that day, we might have 5 specials that day.
Yeah.
It just depends on complexity of the dishes and the manpower we
Right.
had to prep them.
How
So,
has a few years back you guys decided to open up another location inside Whole Foods in Harbor East in Baltimore? How's that been from being in that type of setup versus like a marketplace setup that you're in
well,
previously, and then your restaurant experience that you've had?
it's a little different. Actually, it's crazy. It's like, they've been great, wonderful as a landlord and everything. It's like they're really easy to deal. Well, our experience with this, I don't
Yeah.
know. Overall, I can't speak for everybody, but our
Yeah.
experience overall, they've been really wonderful to deal with. Like, in terms of like anytime we need something or whatever, or
Hmm.
like, and it was easy to get things like done and stuff like that, versus like, well, the market setting is a little different, just because like we had so many more vendors, so people were
Hmm.
coming specific, not, they were coming with the knowledge that not everybody was actually going to eat there. You know what I mean? Like, so,
Right.
you know, the kids might want something else, and might want this and that.
Right.
So, but it did. When we have a lot of vendors in one place, it does bring more people though. So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so I've never really. Some people are afraid to have like other competition there, but I always thought
Mm-hmm.
that actually enhance each other because you just brought more people in. So
Right.
that's, but it's a little different, but our space is slightly bigger in house foods, and our prep space is a little bigger.
Mm-hmm.
Um, just being in the market like that, tight market, you really had like there was not a lot of prep space too. So
Yeah. Not a lot of room to spread out.
no, not at all. So you really had to really be on top of your like inventory and all that stuff, because it's like certain things would
Yeah.
go through in like 1 or 2 days, and other things might be a week. So it's just like, you really had to manage your inventory really well. Not
Right.
that you don't at any other business, but it's just kind of like you can't, because we didn't have so much space or refrigerator. If you didn't order something in time to get it prepped in time and stuff like that, so you had to be on top of your prep cycles. You might not have it for that service
Mm-hmm.
like 2 days later. You know what I mean?
Yeah. 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 Whatever space you had for it, you use it and you got to reorder. So.
Yeah, but
So, I was gonna go talk about how you were telling me, also with the pandemic, just how you had to get creative with revenue. So just having the retail space, is great, but also a little risky. So what are some things that you guys have been thinking
um,
about to diversify your revenue?
so yeah, one of the things is good thing is like we have a little more space at Whole Foods to do stuff like that. So, we're gonna try to add some cooking classes. Things like that. We're
Hmm.
gonna and then also pursue more of the catering stuff. Put
Hmm.
more time into like marketing that,
Yeah.
just so we're not so dependent on a walk-in traffic. Even though walk-in traffic is still like the majority of our income, but at least like
Hmm.
um, if we diversify how all the income streams, at least we won't be as susceptible as we were during the pandemic to everything shuts down. You don't have walk-in traffic. What happens?
Right, right. Yeah, I think how to future proof or pandemic proof your business is on a lot of people's minds, or it really kind of set in the last couple of years, and now people are really thinking about. They probably tried a few different things over the past few years and seeing what's really realistic to keep doing, what's still profitable to keep doing,
Yeah.
and what fits into their business model.
Well, I know like a lot of the ghost kitchens were very I mean, we were actually started ghost kitchens prior to the pandemic,
Hmm.
and but like I know that model was very popular through the pandemic, but it's kind of like,
Yeah,
well, it's just so much competition now, so it's just like
yeah.
the revenue is not for each restaurant is not as good as it used to be, because you just have so many more businesses on those platforms now. So,
Hmm.
and not to mention
Have
that
you
you're also
seen?
competing with like if you're doing Uber.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was
Sorry,
going to go next.
I
Is
lost you for a second. I'm
Oh, I
sorry, I
was going to say
lost you.
that's exactly
Okay.
where I was going to go next with Uber Eats and Grubhub and all of these. Have you seen now? Has that sort of trailed off with at this point, or are you still getting a lot of orders through those services?
I think, well, we had Uber at the other location when we had the Belvedere location. We don't have Uber now. We
Yeah.
have Grubhub
Hmm.
and DoorDash. What a lot
Yeah.
of people don't realize is that Uber has its own ghost kitchens now. So a lot of
Hmm.
the stuff they push to the front pages are their own businesses. So they have
Hmm.
the side, all the other businesses there as
Yeah.
kind of like I said, the more businesses they have, the more attractive it makes for other people. But
Sure.
obviously they're going to push their stuff to the forefront.
Right.
Um, and yeah, and the model is, well, actually now more people realize, like through the pandemic, because so many people started releasing what they were making. Not a lot of people are that sticker shocked anymore about the price difference between the ordering from Uber or DoorDash and the store price, in-store prices, because
Hmm.
a lot of more, well, I wouldn't say everybody, but more people do realize that they take such a big cut of the final bill to the
Right.
and most people don't realize it sometimes is up to like 50%, 55% of the bill that goes to the customer goes to these
Yeah.
platforms. So
It's a hefty chunk. Yeah.
it is. But
Mm.
it's crazy because when I was doing consulting, I was trying to warn a lot of people about and most people didn't realize that because all they would see was the revenue they were going in, so they
Yeah.
might get like 10 or 20 or $30,000 more in revenue, and I would tell them, I was like, it's not the revenues, you got to look at the profit, because
Sure.
you know it would end up costing people $1.20, $1.25 to make the dollar that you're selling it for. So you were actually taking revenue, especially in the initial part when people weren't,
Yeah.
because the initial contracts with these guys,
Hmm.
you weren't allowed to charge a different price than what your in-store price was. So it would cost you a
Oh,
dollar
yeah.
20, $1.25 to for every dollar you're making to do
Right.
these online services, and most people didn't realize it because they were just looking at the total
Yeah.
revenue
The
that was
top
coming,
line.
the top line, and that other 25 cents per dollar was coming in from their actual in-store revenue. They were actually taking 25% of their 25 cents out of the in-store revenue for every dollar to give to Uber or DoorDash.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And that's how we end up with how many restaurants going out of business
well,
in a short
that's
period of time.
a lot of that's it ended up closing, and most people don't realize, and they don't even talk about it, is that there was a
Yeah.
point where a lot of mom and pop shut down because they didn't have the
Hmm.
accounting
That's
to deal with, to
sad.
understand the numbers. So it ended up causing a lot of mom and pop businesses to shut down during that time,
Hmm.
in that low 5 year
Wow.
span.
Yeah, that's a hard lesson to learn, especially for a mom and pop business that's supporting their
Yeah.
family, their staff's family. And I think that they're trying to adapt to new technology. They're trying to stay ahead of the curve. They're trying to stay relevant and trying to answer customer demands. And then
Mhm.
that's what happens.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, so what's next for your career for Edgy? You have some classes on the horizon, which I've seen some great videos. Anything else that
Um,
you want to share?
we're doing like pop-ups and trying to do more collaborations with other people, and sort of that type of stuff, because I guess it's more like, co-branding with other people or stuff, and
Yeah.
sort of, I think that trying to get out there that way, and then also just to tap into different markets that we can't do in our in-store, that allows us to
Yeah.
go to the customer rather than trying to make a customer come. And we
Come to
generally
you.
try to do it, yeah, because we'll generally try to do, like, we do it at the farm at Pregal, which is like, you know,
Hmm.
in Baltimore County, which is, way far away, where most of those people wouldn't even come down to us at all where we are.
Yeah.
So
Excellent. Well, good stuff. The more people that know about you guys and can taste your food, the better, or however you get there.
yeah, right.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
tell everybody where they can find you and if they are in Baltimore City and where to find out about your pop-ups.
so the pop-ups will post about on our Instagram, so at Ejji Eats. And then our in-store, we're at the Whole Foods in Harper East in Baltimore. So we're on the second floor of the Whole Foods, and it's like a beautiful view, great sunset views, great harbor
Yeah.
view.
I'm excited to come down there and see you guys soon in person and,
Well,
and see the space
yeah,
there.
now you're a lot closer too, so.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, Tin, it was great to catch up. Thank you so much for being on Recipe to Revenue. And you and I, I'm sure we'll see each other soon.
Okay, thank you so
Thanks.
much.
All right. Bye.